Good evening, good evening. Get this music stopped here. Got a throat lozenge in there, try to keep my throat from getting too scratchy. But thanks for logging in tonight. This will be, depending on how the chat goes, it'll probably be the last night on the suspension for this go around. Might make it one more, but I'm pretty much, we've gone over everything, so we'll see how that goes. Hope everybody had a good week. Hey, I see Kenny on. Hey man, how you doing? Been a while. But you know, I said I hope everybody had a good week. I'm pretty busy. Friday I did IHRA chassis certification, so I put about 400 miles on my truck, getting around the state of Florida, getting some people certified, and finishing up on Rihanna 2.0. It's exciting information. Thank you, John. Yeah, so I'm just working on the front clip, trying to get that off. Busy, need some suspension knowledge. Yeah. I was trying to get the motor assembled for the NASCAR this weekend, but that didn't work out. Got busy, yard work and all that stuff, and kind of drove me a little crazy. I wanted to get that started, but we'll have to see. Maybe we can get that going in the near future here. I see all these events going by and we don't have the car done, so. And that would be something I didn't have time, and I won't probably have time before next week's show. It'd be really interesting to go over the suspension on that car and see what the NASCAR boys were doing back in the late 1990s. I could probably get some of the measuring done, but I need to get the springs out of it and see what springs are in it. And I don't have an engine, so I can't get corner weights. But that would be a good follow-up down the road. See where the alignment and Ackerman and all those things were. But so anyway, we're going to do shock springs and roll rates, which is the combination of the front roll center versus the rear roll center. A lot of this stuff that we're into now, you really got to use a computer program, and then kind of take it all with a grain of salt, because you have to, especially the spring rates. I went to a couple different companies today and got their calculators so I can show on the show here tonight. And it's funny, on a streetcar autocross type situation, get almost a 200 pounds spring variation between manufacturers. So you got to kind of take the information and roll with it. I seem to think, in my experiences, that most of the chassis companies that make kits, RideTech, QA1, I'm not so much at UMI. I haven't really used any of their stuff, so I don't know how their spring rates stuff is, but it seems like most of the companies overspring when you go into their charts. I know with QA1, whenever I'm ordering a set of shocks, especially if I'm doing something custom and I have to talk to somebody in tech, when we talk about spring rates, they're usually considerably heavier than what I want to put in the car. So, but with that, like you said, it's got to go with a little experience and stuff. Of course, in drag racing, the springs are really soft, and depending on the back of the car, whether you're running a squat 4-link or you have the rear instant center set up for a squat or anti-squat, depends on what the spring rates are going to be. So the radial cars that we actually try to get separation, so we're always in the anti-squat area of the IC. Those cars, we run very light springs, like 60-pound springs, because the suspension is not collapsing on the car at all. All it has to do is hold the body up. And those cars typically have a little bit more nose weight than typical. So then, of course, a big tire slick car, bias ply slick, they're going to run a squat IC setting very low and forward of the CG of the car. And because the body is squatting over top of the rear end, you have to run a much heavier spring rate. Most of those cars, 25, 20, 100-pound cars with, let's just say, a 52, 53% front weight, those cars will be probably in the 110 to 130 range. So, you have to kind of put some of that calculation into what you're doing. And then trial and error, of course, that's always the best thing. Trying to think if there's anything else we want to kind of hang for another couple minutes before we get into it. See if anybody else pops in. I know everybody kind of 7 o'clock's a weird time. It's definitely worked out better than when we were getting on at 6:30, but people are still traveling home from work or eating dinner or whatever they're doing. So, and of course, depends on whether you're East Coast, West Coast. I know Ryan is usually out in the West Coast. He's from the West Coast, so it's a little earlier for him. So I guess we kind of go over. I don't remember the episode numbers, but I put some of the information in the titles. But we started out with alignment, looking at what we want to do with camber gains and what caster does and the effects of toe. Then the next show we did was roll centers on the front suspension. What the angles of the lower A-arms and upper A-arms and what that does with the cornering, the roll center, not CG, but the roll center of the car. And we talked about Ackerman. And then I think it was 2 weeks ago, we did four-link and ladder bar rear suspension, where your IC is and what the relationship from the CG of the car to whether the car is going to have squat or anti-squat when it leaves the line or accelerates. And then what did we do last week? We may have did that last week. So anyway, so if you missed one of the earlier shows, just look in the on my main page on YouTube and look at the lives. And I'm trying to go through and put information in all the titles. I've only gotten back to about 31 or episode 30. I still got quite a few episodes to go back through and create a title for or a caption of what that show was mainly based off of. So I'll work on that. Maybe this weekend I'll try to get some of that done if I have some time. It's going to be a busy week. I told you guys, gave you a little 4200 Atlas engine update last week that I had gone over the previous weekend to Leo's and got the wastegates all set up. Put the ECU back in the car, got the fuel pump and all that stuff all working properly again. We got the bump box working now, so the car should be easier for Billy to stage. And I worked on some analog with the Holly system, and I created a multiple rev limiter wow, let me spit this out. So you have your launch rev limiter as a setting in the software. And what I did was I wrote a 2D table that as boost came in, it advanced the RPM to a higher RPM. So as the turbo started spooling, because I wanted it to, when it's dropping cylinders on a two-step, it's going to help spool the turbo. That and retarding the timing and adding a little bit extra fuel in there. So I got it to where it would start sitting on a two-step at 4,500, and then boost would get up to about 2-3 pounds by looking at the data logs. So at 2 pounds, I gave it another 150 RPMs, and then when it got to 4 pounds, which added 2 more pounds, I went to 4,800, and then as the boost kept going up, I got it all the way up to 5,200. And when I went on the break at Leo's house, we did not time it. I didn't want to get too much heat in the transmission, but it seemed like maybe 3 seconds. It went from going watt, it went to 12 pounds of boost. So unfortunately, like I mentioned last week, I did not think the data log. I can't believe I goofed on that. But anyway, so this Sunday we are going to Bradenton and for the Run Day Sunday, and I've got a really good feeling that we're going to be able to get some good clean passes out of the car, because now all the staging issues that we were having, I seem to have those all ironed out. We went over the engine, we cut the filter apart, it was spotless. Thank you, knock on wood. I'm very happy to hear that, because we've had nothing but engine problems in the past. And I don't think that I'm any world's best engine builder or anything like that. I just, tried to cross my T's and dot my I's, and so far, knock on wood, the motor is responding properly and it's not trying to kill itself. So I see Chris is in. Hey Chris, how you doing? So so it's gonna be another busy weekend riding around in in the dually because I'm going to see family on Thursday in Jacksonville, and then from Jacksonville, Sunday morning I have to go from Jacksonville to Bradenton. We'll run Leo's car, and I gotta go back to Jacksonville, pick up my wife, and then drive home on Monday. So it'll be another. That's probably gonna be about a 1,000-mile weekend. But that's what happens when you have dates overlapping each other. You gotta do what you gotta do. All right, so I think we got some pretty good time in on that. So let's start looking at some of the stuff that I got together for us. So this that is the formula for figuring out your springs. None of us are going to figure that out. I did not do enough algebra in high school. Didn't want to do any in high school, not knowing that I was going to be using it all my life, but oh well. And what you're trying to do, this is basically another formula. What you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out how much spring rate you need in this section to hold the car up out here. So you have to measure from the control arm to the spring, then control arm to the ball joint, the angle that the spring is in, and then with those measurements and corner weights, you can figure out what spring the car is going to require. And on the rear end, even though this is a 4-link, it's still the same kind of thing. If your spring is in front of the axle, it is going to have to be heavier than if it's behind the axle, because you're closer to the instant center of the suspension. And if it's right on top of the housing, then it's whatever the weight is on that wheel. That would be an easy way of figuring that out. Of course, if you're IRS, then it's going to be more like a front suspension type deal. And if you got a cantilever setup, then that's a whole nother thing. This chart here is somebody's chart that they put on the internet. So if you got 1,000 pounds on your front tires, they're saying 250 pound spring. I know for a fact that I've got cars that are probably around 1,500-1,600 pounds on the front wheels, and we run a 300 or 275. So once again, you got to kind of take a grain of salt with these spring rates. They usually skew heavy, but in actuality, you want a softer spring, and we'll get to that in a minute. Some of these things are really small. This is I think from QA1, and they've got a listing. So if you don't have scales and you haven't weighed your car, you can kind of go off of these. You got a 67, 69 Camaro, or like Chris has got a X body. They say they should be around 1,750 on the front wheels and about 1,500 on the rear wheels at a 3,250 pound total. And you can kind of deduct and add for different options you have on the car. It gives you a pretty good spot for using for your overall vehicle weight, but the best is always to weigh your car. Oh, sorry, wrong button. There we go. And remember, I said you had to measure the angle of your spring, and the reason being, even though they're saying shock mounting because they're talking about coilover. As the spring or coilover is angled, it's not as effective. So you have to have a correction factor, and you can see 10% angle, it's only 2% correction, so that's very minimal. But if you have a coilover spring that's at 45 degrees, which I've seen some street rods, you're losing almost 30%. You have to add 30% to the spring to make it do the same job because it's not effective at that angle. So you always want to try to mount your shocks, coilovers, as straight up and down as you possibly can. Just makes it a lot easier. But this is a chart that kind of gives you that idea. And so when we're talking about shocks, there's all kinds of different ones. Okay, this is a QA1 that bolts into a F body, A body, any kind of car that had a spring on the axle and a shock. This moves the coilover to the shock location. They make them for the B bodies, for the donks. They bolt in, and you now use a coilover. This is QA1's new mod shocks. We'll talk about them in a little bit. And this is their front coilover setup, which has the spring at 2.5 inches at the bottom, and it goes out to 5 at the top. So you can put it in a stock frame pocket, and the spring is contacting the frame as would the stock spring, but you have the ability to raise and lower the platform for a coilover. And here's another example of different installations. These are bolts on either side. I think this is for like a CTSV. This goes over top of the A arm to get the lower control arm to bolt in the car. Those are Menser shocks. Excuse me. Again, the other shocks were double adjustable. These are single adjustable QA1s. This is a AFCO 4-way shock. So you got your compression and rebound, and then you got your high speed. Some drag race classes use these. These are definitely used in road racing and autocross, stuff like that. And it has a nitrogen cartridge, so you can adjust the nitrogen pressure. This is one's a Menser's strut front end for drag racing. Very high end shock. There's some Ride-Tech shocks, which these are made by Fox, and actually Fox owns Ride-Tech now. But they have a shock like a full set of shocks, and Fox obviously has been in business for a long time with shocks. And another Menser with the canister actually affixed to the bottom of the shock. And there's the new AFCO. Here's some pictures of different AFCOs. So there's the one with the shock mounted. There's the cartridge. There's a double adjustable monotube, and then a strut that's double adjustable. You got your adjustments on top and bottom. If you have to buy shocks and you can swing it, buy double adjustables. And I'll show you why in a little bit here. All right, so this program was doing this earlier, 15, so we want to go 16. For some reason, it won't advance. So some more AFCOs. Now here's the new mod shock that QA1 is making, and you can see they have the double adjusters, and this adjuster's out. This was a SEMA award winner a couple years ago, because you can actually take this valve out and not lose any fluid in the shock and change the valving by changing these knobs, which was pretty unique, because all the shocks before this, to do the valving, you actually had to disassemble the shock. And there's the close-up of the valving, rebound, compression, soft and lower, and they just have these in different increments, so you can get, if you run out of, if you have your compression all the way tight and you can't get any more, well, then you can pop the valve out and put the next step valve up in. Yeah, Chris, they look expensive. They're not actually that bad. I think they're maybe $150 more than a regular double adjustable shock, which is probably $100 more than a single adjustable shock. The thing is, though, you can do a lot of tuning with it. In drag racing, if you don't have a double adjustable shock, at least on the back of the car, but really you need one in the front too. You're leaving a lot as far as getting the car down the track. And the same as autocross. Of course, it takes some time to figure out what you need to do with the shocks, but you start out, if you don't know, if you don't have any idea of how to adjust or where to adjust them, the manufacturers give very good specific instructions on where to start, and from there you can start making notes and make changes and see how it affects the way the car handles. And then eventually you'll have a pretty good handle on what you need to do. So here's a cutaway of I believe this was a Fox shock. And I don't know if you can, let me see if I can, yeah, this is a good picture. So underneath this nut and washer, you see these little discs here, and these are all valves. So there's a main piece here, piston, with the seal, and so you got fluid on either side of the shock. Now there's little holes in there and one-way valves for the fluid to go one way for compression, the fluid to go the other way for rebound. And on both sides of this piston, there's these rings, and these rings have different strengths. So it takes X amount of force to bend the washer to let the fluid through. So that's how you get your valving. Now, when you have an adjustable shock, you're changing some of the fluid characteristics of how it gets through that piece. John says, I've been wanting to do Viking double adjustable front and rear. Just not sure I want to do coilovers or regular. The nice thing about coilover is you can change your spring rates, and you have an adjustable ride height. That's the gains of coilover. So my vote would be, whenever you can put a coilover on the car, I would put the coilover on the car, because now you can adjust your ride heights. When you have a fixed spring, it's, first of all, it's a much harder thing. Like Chris, his X body, his Nova, he's got a 3-link in his car now. But if it was still on leaf springs, it's quite expensive to change leaf springs. Whereas in coilovers, you can get springs for about $60-70 a spring. So you can really play around with your spring rates to get the way, get the cornering action or the launching action that you want. So it just, to me, it seems easier. For me, I always have a handful of different rates in the shop. So when I order a set for a customer's car, I'll order something that I don't have in stock, and that way it gives me the ability to adjust the ride height or the ride control by changing the spring rates if I want to. It's just a quick, easy way to go. Any of us racers, I'm sure we all have friends that probably have springs in stock. So it's stuff like that. You can always, swap around springs and try stuff. Of course, if you go into, even if you, let me rephrase that, even if you do go into a roll center program and you calculate what the roll centers are doing and you still may need to change the springs, because all these calculations are computer driven. Somebody wrote the tuning, and you might not like the way they're trying to get the vehicle to operate. So that's the whole thing with chassis dynamics, is trying to get the vehicle to operate the way you want it to operate. Faster lap times obviously is everybody's goal, whether it's quarter mile, eighth mile, or autocross or road course. Excuse me. So here's a drawing, and you can see these compression shims, the rebound shims, excuse me, and then they have a port in that piston that lets the fluid go back and forth, and that's where it is in the shock. It's in the main body, attached to the piston shaft. So that's basically how it works. And just another picture of it in separation. You can see how it's got different. You got different rates, and they got sometimes they'll have 2 or 3 stacks. It just depends on the shock and the control. That's an Avco shock. I don't know why I can't get these things to ever stay at the same size. Again, just an exploded view to see, so you can see how the whole thing operates. So, and I apologize for these. I couldn't get any clean shock data runs. I don't know why. I looked all over the internet and I couldn't find any. But so if you have a single adjustable shock, well, let's go over this first of all. This is velocity. Well, I can't even read it because it's. I think that's pressure, and this is velocity down here. So this is shaft speed, inch per second, and this is the force that you're trying to adjust. So you always are going to have some type of a nose on. You're going to have a starting point, obviously, because this is where the shaft is not moving and there's no force. And then as the shaft moves faster, then it can control more force. So now on a single adjustable shock, first of all, a non-adjustable shock, you got one line for up and compression and one line for rebound. That's it. You have nothing else. A single adjustable shock, they are tied together. Either you're only controlling, depending on the shock manufacturer. Some will only control rebound. Some will only control compression. QA1 is like a 60-40 split of compression and rebound, but you're still not getting the full use of the chart because you can't separate the two. Now this is what a adjustable shock looks like. So you can change all these settings by adjusting your compression and your rebound. So that shows you what the shock can do as far as force. What you want to try to understand from this is that you can have a rebound way down here with 500 pounds of force, but you can have a compression of only 100. So that's why the double adjustable is so much better. And then of course you can get into the nitrogen or CO2 cartridge shocks, which have high speed adjustment, and that makes a whole nother adjustment out here. So obviously you can get crazy on shocks, but if you put double adjustable, you're in pretty good shape. I guess that's the main thing. Here's another picture of a double adjustable with high speed force. So you can see how we get the normal nose in the background. Now we get the high speed that really comes around. So the high speed can give you can be soft up front, and then as it gets into the higher velocity rates, it gets way stiffer. So that just shows you how much more adjustment you have when you go to a high speed four-way shock. 26. I think that's those are the slides there. So when you get let's go to let's look at spring rates first. So you can go to your spring your shock and spring manufacturer, and they'll have this information on their websites. So here again, QA1 is giving you the angle correction factor for a shock that the spring that's on an angle. And they're giving you some information here how to figure the spring rates out. They don't have, this one doesn't actually have a calculator on it, but you can go work through this. This one's Hyperco. Hyperco actually has a computer on here, a calculator. And what I did here was I have a Trans Am in the shop, a 80 Trans Am. So I took some information off that car so we could come up with some numbers so I can show you guys how this all works. So you get your corner weight. That's your front suspension, how much weight is on the front suspension. And then you get your unsprung weight is anything that is not attached to the chassis. So your tire, your brakes, your rim, your spindle is 100% unsprung. And then your A-arms, your coilover, and your anti-roll bar arms, not the whole anti-roll bar, but the arms of the anti-roll bar are 50% unsprung. So you can take those numbers, add them together if you wanted to be precise. You're working on, a NASCAR, SCCA car, something like that. You're going to take all that apart. You're going to know all the weights of all this stuff. Otherwise, you can just go to these sites and play around with the numbers. And you can see here, they give you some information. You can switch back and forth to each thing. It'll tell you a little bit about it. And you can see here on unsprung weight is usually between 70 and 120 pounds for a normal car. So being this car is a street car and it's got pretty heavy stuff, it's got cast aluminum wheels, I went with 120. So our A dimension, our pivot bolt to the shock mount, which is also the spring mount, is 9 3/4 inches, and overall length of the A arm is 18 inches, and the shock is at a 5% angle, so 85%, depending on which way you look at it. And we have a 4-inch ride height on the shock shaft. So going that, the computer gives you 1130 for sprung weight, gives you a motion ratio. That's because for 1 inch here, this is going to move a 1/2 inch. That's what the motion ratio is. So if you want to jack the car up 1 inch, you move this spring platform a 1/2 inch and you'll pick the car up 1 inch. They give you a static load and they give you a spring rate needed, 523.53. So obviously they don't make a spring like that, so you would go to a 550. Now, I was pretty impressed that this calculator actually was pretty close. That's what I actually have 550s on that car, and that's what I had picked on it. RideTech is another company out there, and I did the same, basically put the same information. On this one, you can actually pick front and rear, so we'll do the front first. Excuse me. So same information, and they actually give you a little chart here. A coupe or convertible between 3,000 and 4,000. Your front at 55% front weight should be between 825 and 1,100. So I'm estimating this car at 1,250 on the front. 120 pound spring rate, just like we did on the other, which tells you 1130 for your sprung weight. And of course, same thing, 9 3/4 for the dimension A, and 18 for dimension B, and it gives you a motion ratio of 0.542. So that was the same as the Hyperco one was. We put in the same spring angle, 85 degrees, which is a 5 degrees off of straight up and down. And we told it we got a 4-inch stroke. Now, on RideTech, for a daily cruiser, they're rating a 750 pound spring. For performance driving, 800. And for a road course or autocross, something with really slick, sticky tires like slicks and stuff like that, a 900 pound spring. Here's where you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt. I think those are really high spring rates. Like I said, I've got 550 on the car, and the car rides really nice. But it's what I would consider a cruiser daily driver setup. It's not a setup for autocross or anything like that. You definitely want to increase your spring rates as the stickier tires you put on it and the more cornering you're going to do with it. So just kind of giving you some information there. So let's go over, I didn't do the rear, but let's go ahead and do rear now while we're here. I just got to hit enter. And it still hasn't switched over. That's weird. I guess you just got to put in your new information. So they're saying we should be about 900. I'll put 950. Unsprung, you see here they got you a little cheat sheet here. Unsprung, because this has got a straight axle in the back of the car, so it's a heavier differential. And if you have like a Dana 60 or a 9-inch with a nodular iron housing and big axles, it's going to be a lot more than 175. But we'll go with we're going to go with 150 because this has got a 10 bolt in it with stock axles, but it does have Willwood brakes, so they're lighter. So that gives you a sprung rate of 830. Now, we're not going to have motion ratio because we're going to figure the shocks are straight up and down. So this would be 0. And this would be 0. Or would it be? The shock is almost, well, let's go straight up and down. Oh, that worked out right. So, all right, so let's go back. So, if you remember the pictures I showed earlier where if the shock is on the rear end housing, it's the same as there's 0 dimension. If it's forward or rear, you'd have to put a dimension in. But we're just for discussion, we're gonna say the shock is mounted right on top of the housing, straight up and down. So there's no angle. So the shock is in a motion ratio 1-to-1. So with a 4-inch stroke, our daily driver cruiser would have a 300-pound spring. Performance would be 350. Road racing would be 375. Obviously, drag racing, you'd be much lighter spring than that. But at least that kind of gives you a ballpark where to go at. So these are out here for you. Whoever you're dealing with, you can get a rate from them. I'm sure Viking and AFCO doesn't have a calculator on there. They've got a chart. So let's show the. Yeah, so this is AFCO's deal. They just give you what springs you should have for whatever weights you have. Now you see this is more drag racing stuff here. So a 900-pound car, they're saying 95-pound spring. So that would be more consistent with what we would normally see. And they would say for drag racing, you'd want about a 225 for the front of the car, which again, that is about consistent. And of course, you have your multiplier. You'd have to add into that if your shock is on an angle. So you can see that they have shocks, springs in all different lengths: 4, 8, 10, 12, 14. And here's something a lot of people don't know: they have take-up springs. Now Hypercobe makes them also, and this is a flat banded spring that you can see here. It only has enough weight for 5 pounds, and then they have a spring guide. So what you do is, say your shock, when the car has got weight on it, you've got a 12-inch spring, and it's on the spring platforms front and back. But you jack it up, and you've got a shock that's got 8 inches of travel in it. So as you jack it up, the spring now falls out. What you do is you take this take-up spring and a spring guide, and what it does is this would go on the top, and then the spring guide, and then your regular spring underneath it. And what it would do is when you jack the car up, this takes up the slack and keeps the spring in the platforms. So when you let the car back down on the ground, you don't hear the springs popping back in place. Or worse yet, they don't pop back in place until you go on the track, and the first corner you pull, or the first time you leave the starting line, the spring pops into the proper position, and now it's totally changed the spring rates. So it's just something that a lot of people don't know that's out there, and it works really well. You don't have to worry about. We run them in all the radial cars. We run them because as the rear end drops, you get that suspension droop. The springs would fall out, especially when we're only running a 60-pound spring to start with. So I just wanted to show you that is available out there. And again, here's your AFCO springs, $79.99 retail. You can buy them cheaper through outside sources. So again, that's why I like running coilovers, because you can get a spring pretty inexpensive, and you can change what what your rates are, and you can change your ride heights. Something else didn't have a good picture of it, but we can use this. We can use this image right here. I think I can. Yeah, I can. Let me stretch it out. All right, so I was discussing this with somebody a little bit ago, and I was doing a wheel alignment, and I was telling them that I needed to run the spanner up on the shock to raise the car up. And the customer's like, well, I wouldn't want you to do that because now you're going to change the spring rate. And that is not actually true. Actually, it's totally wrong. So how a spring works, and this is all springs, whether it's a big coilover, a big spring, that 5.5 inch like OEM spring or whatever. A spring rate is you put the spring in a spring tester, and you push the spring. You have a pressure gauge on there until the needle just comes off of 0. So now you know the spring is set. Then what you do is you collapse the spring 1 inch. At 1 inch, that tells you what the spring rate is. So on a 300-pound spring, the rate that 300 rated spring at 1 inch of collapse will hold up 300 pounds. At 2 inches, it holds up 600 pounds. And every inch you drop, it multiplies again. So unless you have a variable rate spring, that's a whole different animal. But your typical spring is going to be whatever the rate is, every inch of collapse, it's going to gain that much again. Valve springs are the same way. So what happens when you turn the platform on a coilover is you're actually picking up where the spring is sitting. And when you pick that up, you're actually pushing the car up, so the length of the spring is not changing. That's why the spring rate will not change by doing that. Unless you have a super soft spring and it's collapsing, or you have a shock topped out and now you're just crushing the spring. It's not actually picking the car up. But for all intents and purposes, when you adjust the spring platform on a coilover, you are not changing the spring rate, you're only changing the ride height. So I hope that makes sense, because that's important. And now you might say, why are drag cars running such lighter springs than a road course car or a street car even? And the reason is because you're storing energy. So what happens on a drag car is we're putting a lighter spring than what actually is supposed to be on the vehicle. So then you have to pull the platform up, and you have to get enough pressure out of the spring to move the car up. So at that point, in that circumstance, you are to a certain degree raising the rate of the spring. But what you're doing is you're giving it stored energy. So when the car does its pitch for forward traction, the spring has stored energy to relax, and as it relaxes, it gets softer. It's not going to be like on a road course car. If you have a spring crushed 2 inches and it's a 600-pound spring, it's 1,200 pounds, and when it relaxes an inch, you've changed it 600 pounds. But in a drag car, it's a lot less of a change, but it's what we call stored energy, and that's why we like running the softer springs, because we're trying to get the car to pitch to make traction. Where in a road course or autocross, you're running a really heavy spring because you're trying to control body roll. So it's a whole different scenario there. So keep that in mind when you're selecting your shocks. You need to your springs. You need to take into consideration what you're doing with the car. If you're trying to do everything with the car, which would be kind of more like a daily driver type thing, where you're trying to make it do everything good, then you're going to have to compromise once again, as we talked about in alignments and everything else. You're going to have to compromise to make it work with everything you want to work with. So, so when you get shocked from your manufacturer, they're going to give you valving adjustments. So here's a QA1 double. Here they give you two different scenarios. So a shock with a single adjustable knob, and you can see for drag racing 0 to 6. Now on this you have to read. So this is pretty important. You have to pay attention to how they're counting their clicks. So on the QA1, they're starting from dead soft is 0, and as you click in more tension, that's going up. So drag racing, they went 0 to 6 clicks. So they want no maximum, softness up to 6. They have 18 clicks in there. So you're still in the first third of the valving. Nice ride handling, same thing. Firm ride, improved handling, you go 6 to 12 clicks, and aggressive handling, you go 13 to 18. That's with a single adjustable shock. Now, look at the difference when you go to a double adjustable. Drag racing, 0 to 6 on compression, 4 to 10 on rebound. That's the same shock. But this one, the rebound's doing it for you, and you have no control of it. But now here you do. Nice ride handling, 0 to 6, same on compression, but you have a little bit more finite on rebound. Firm ride, improved handling, you're tighter on compression, tighter on rebound. And aggressive, you're 13 plus on compression, and you're maxed out on rebound. Now, this is for rear valving. If you're drag racing, you would probably have your rebound pretty tight, because that's going to help the car control wheelies. The tighter you put the rebound, the less the car is going to try to wheel stand. So, when you get your shocks, you'll see. Read the instructions. If they don't give you instructions, talk to the to tech, and they'll give you some different scenarios and stuff. And then what you normally do is on all of these settings, what I typically do is I start at the softest, at the 0, and then I make a run, and then put 2 clicks in, make a run, put 2 clicks in, make a run, and then you find out where your lap time or your starting line 60 foot is the best, and then that's where you want to take the shot. Obviously, for a street performance car, it's going to be wherever you're most comfortable with the ride. Of course, with the mod shock, they don't have the mod shock tuning on the website. I tried to find that, so I guess you have to get with them on that. Here's AFCO's instructions. They give you all kinds of different things, what to do in different scenarios. What should I do if the car spins as soon as the car launches? They tell you to soften the extension on the front shocks and soften the extension on the rear shocks to make the car hit harder. So they got all these different scenarios, and they tell you how to do it. So if you follow these instructions and keep good notes, you'll become a shock guy pretty quick. Here's some more information on their shocks and spring rates and stuff. Excuse me. Here's Menser's shocks. Now Menser Motorsports, he revalves AFCO shocks, and is pretty much the guru for radial tire racing. So here's his sheet for front shocks, and he says it's factory settings. Now he goes from full tight. See, so you have to pay attention to that, because each shock manufacturer is going to tell you a different information. But on his shocks, he goes compression from full tight, 10 clicks, and rebound 15 clicks. And I believe his shocks have 25 or 30. There's a lot of adjustment in there. Then he tells you general starting point for marginal decent track. Change the settings to 5 and 15 with how much travel, hot and greasy, cool, exceptional tracks. And look, it even has Holly Springs in South Georgia, because those are big tracks for radial racing. And even information for there. And then what to do with bumpy tracks, if your car is power wheeling, all these different things. He's on, the guy has got his thumb on radial racing for sure. And then he's also got rear shocks, and again, guide for radial racing, 275 or 315, 8.5 or 10.5 true slicks. So all pretty much small tire stuff. And he has all of his same information there. Where to start, hints for adjusting for different track conditions, and then what to do to control the car as it's going down the track. So, like John wants to put the Vikings on. They're a good shock. From what I have heard, those guys were engineers at QA1, and they broke apart and did their own deal. I have not personally used a Viking shock yet, but they seem to be on. I see a lot of autocross cars are running their stuff. So again, you would just go to their website or talk to their tech guys. I'm sure they have worksheets just like this, and got to keep logs. Data is king, so you got to keep logs on what's going on the autocross track. Make some adjustments, see what it's doing. Look at even though this is for drag racing, but still, what changes he's making for a hot, greasy track, for a loose track or a tight track. Autocross and road course are going to be the same way. When the sun's out and there's not a cloud in the sky, it's a hot, greasy racetrack. So you're going to have to adjust your valving, because you're not going to be able to have as much tire bite as you would if it was a tight, cool track, if you're running in the evening, or if it's a heavy overcast day. I mean, asphalt temperatures can change 50, 60 degrees. So you have to keep all those things in mind, but you write down your notes. We had a really great thing down here in South Florida before PBIR closed, because we were running autocross on a go-kart track. So we were running pretty close to the same track. In fact, for a year and a half, they ran the same exact course. So it was really great for dialing the car in, because you knew if you made changes over between events, when you went back, you knew what the lap times were from the last time. So you look in your logbook. So it worked out really well for that. Unfortunately, the track is gone now, so we don't have that option. But if you can get a track to test on, or a road course to test on, or something that is repeatable, you can gain a lot of information from all that. I think that was. So that's basically the talk about shocks and springs, how to figure out that stuff. So let's go now, kind of wrap up everything that we've been talking about. So, we were talking about alignments, and I wish I could make this bigger on this screen, but it doesn't work. It won't let me do it. One problem with this software. So we set up our alignment. We do our roll center. We figure out our shocks and springs. We put the data into the computer. It gives us our front roll center. So drag racing, this isn't as important as it would be for all other forms of motorsport, but let's just go over with the other forms of motorsport for the second, and I'll go back to drag racing. So that is our front suspension. A lot of small tire guys are running Vikings up north. Okay. Yeah, down south, everybody's running Menser. But it wouldn't be it wouldn't be really hard for a guy at Viking to take a Menser and run on the dyno and figure out what he's doing and really speed up their learning curve. I mean, that's the thing. If you can get your shocks on a shock dyno, you can really see what the shock does and what the adjustments do. So, but yeah, I mean, the Mensers are they're priced that he knows that everybody wants to run his shock. So you're paying good money for them. So it doesn't shock me that people shocked. It doesn't shock me that other companies are getting into the game because there's money to be made there. So That's good for the Vikings. I'll have to look into them. Maybe next time I go to a Good Guys or something, if they're there, I'll have to talk with their engineers and see what they got to say. But so, as I was saying, we got our alignment, we got our shock settings, we got our front roll center. Then we go to our rear suspension. We put in the data for what trailing arm or leaf spring or coilover, whatever we got back there, 4-link, 3-link. This happens to be my 50 that I had already set up in the computer. And as we were talking before, wherever your panhard bar is or your center pivot of your Watts link is your rear roll center height. So you get all that information. It's going to be hard to see because this is so small, but there's a little green line because I had a 3/4 inch and a roll bar on the car. So you figure all that out, and then you go into this program and you click on Report on Details. Now the computer, and this will open up to a full page, so now it's over to the sides. That's kind of crappy too. I apologize for this. I can't control this guy's website program. So here, it's just giving you a rundown of what you have set up. 650-pound springs in the front with a 603 motion ratio. You can see there was a little different setting, the way the suspension was set up on the car. Shock point wasn't in exactly the same place. But all that information's there. 200-pound springs in the back of the car. Then the computer will figure out your front lateral load transfer and your front lateral load distribution, and it gives you the same for the back. And then it itemizes what it's doing. It looks at the track that you're running on, and you give it that information, and it tells you where you're at. And here it's saying for general over/under steel rating, the car should be neutral. Level ground roll rate at 2 inches. So, and on here's a new thing they added: a transitional handling. This is entering and exiting the turn for a 0-degree banking, because in autocross our tracks are typically flat. Classic lateral load transfer 53.6 front neutral, and it says note understeer, a number above 55 is safer than oversteer. So being it's 53.6, it's more neutral and more would be more of an oversteer than or understeer, more so than an oversteer. So that's what this program does. You put in your information, and it's going to tell you how the car is going to react with the setup you have. Now, if you get done and you have, say, this number here is 58, well, then you go back into your formulas, change spring rates, change anti-roll bar sizes or positions, and you keep playing around till you get the number closest as you can to 55. So this was a proposed setting that I was going to do with my car before I ended up selling it. So that's what that does. So going back to drag racing again, here's our suspension. Obviously, if you don't have adjustable suspension, then it would only have one lower control arm point on the housing, one lower control arm point on the chassis, and same as the upper. If you go back, for anybody that doesn't know or doesn't understand all this, go back to my squat, anti-squat live show. We talked about how to figure this out, but this is the CG of the car. So it's the distance between the wheelbase of where your car would be even. So if it's 50-50, it's dead middle of the car. If it's 53 front, 47, it's going to be back a little bit more. And then there's a way to figure out the height, or you can go off camshaft height for a quick analysis. But basically, if you put two pins at that position, you could pick the car up and it would be completely balanced. So with a program like this, you can plot where your suspension's arms are sitting. Now that we have the CG of the car, this dotted line going through the screen to the center line of the front wheel at the height of CG, that is our squat, anti-squat line. So anything below this line, the car is going to squat. And the farther away from the line, the more squat it will get. And the same as going the opposite direction. Anything above this line is anti-squat. So it'd be, on this line would be 100% anti-squat, which would be 0. And then the higher you go, the more extension you're going to get, or separation you're going to get on the rear end, or anti-squat. And this blue line here is representing where the 4-link arms are on this particular model, and that's the IC. That's the instant center of the suspension. That's the position that the rear end is going to pivot around. And you can see on this particular vehicle, when it was plotted, it's actually 148% anti-squat. So this car is going to get extension rather than compression when it leaves the starting line. A big tire slick car will want compression. A leaf spring car with traction bars or with cow tracks on it, cars with 4-link cars like Mustangs, like Turbo Gixxer's dealing with, those cars with south side bars, they get extension. And the extension works well, especially for a radial tire car, because it's pushing the tire into the ground using the torque to pick the body up. And it works very well. Wouldn't work as good on a slick car, but you can make it work. So, but just different things of doing. So that's what we were trying to do with all this. So you get your plots, you got your IC, whether it's in squat or anti-squat, and then you got your shocks, which you can control the rate of compression and extension. And that's why you want a double adjustable shock, so that you can fine-tune the vehicle dynamics to do exactly what you're looking to do. If you put a shock that's not adjustable, like you put the old Lakewood 9010s on the front, it's going to do what it's going to do, and you have no choice. You can't control anything. All you can do is try to tie the front end down with limiters or something like that, put more weight on the front end. But if you have a double adjustable shock, now you can play with rebound and compression and slow the car's reaction to lift the front of the car, and you can control your wheelies. So hopefully you guys got something out of that. It's a lot to take in. 40 years of doing it, I still don't have a 100% grasp of it. I've got, school of hard knocks. I've been there, done that. We've taken cars, and many times back in the 90s, we would take cars, especially when the track was open. We used to be able to go up there Wednesday nights, Friday nights, and Saturday nights. So we would actually take the car, make an adjustment, go to the track, see what it did, and then take that data, go back to the shop, make more adjustments from what we learned, trying to figure out which way we want to make the car go. And it was before we were young guys. We didn't have data recorders and all this kind of stuff. We did time slips, cameras, filming the car leaving the starting line, what the rear tire was doing, what the front suspension was doing, and stuff like that. I mean, that's where I first learned bump steer, because stock vehicles do not have very good bump steer in them. The OE manufacturer is not worried about the car pulling the wheels off the ground, so they don't really care how much bump steer you get. But when you see the cars doing weird things, especially before we started playing around with anti-roll bars, the car would have a torque twist, so the right rear is way down, the left rear is kind of peeling up a little bit, and the car is on the wheelie, so when it comes down, it's going to touch the right front tire first. And then, of course, if the car has bump steer, if it's towing in or towing out, the car is going to dart to one direction. So we quickly learned, hey, we got problems here, and started straightening bump steer out. And next thing you know, the car is going straight no matter how it lands. All right, we figured that out. So now we know on all the cars from here out, we do bump steer. And then we start working with, uh, before we even had the money to put coilovers in the car, on the old Mustangs going back, 86, 87, 88, when the 5.0 Mustangs were the rule car. We figured out a long time ago to put 4-cylinder springs in the car because the springs were way softer because the car was lighter, because it didn't only had a little 4-cylinder instead of a big V8. And sure enough, the car would get more weight transfer. Of course, those cars were typically in a squat position, so the car would squat on the starting line and lift the front. And then, then we started playing with shocks, putting different stiffness shocks on. And then I met Hal Lee, which he had a company called Avo, and he was one of the first guys that came out for the Sportsman guy, a single and then later a double adjustable shock, which ended up getting bought out by QA1, and that's where their double adjustable shocks came from. Before that, QA1 was mainly a circle track shock manufacturer, and even then, they didn't really have any adjustable shocks. They had a row of shocks. You'd pick a shock that you're running the size, and then they would have 10 different valvings. So you would buy different shocks and change the shock to get the valving change. Shocks were kind of cheap, but that's how you did it back in the day. And then as we gained information, we were able to do more and more stuff, all the way up to in the early 2000s when I was running Pro Mod, and we had Coney electric adjustable shocks. So we actually had a double adjustable coilover shock in the rear of the car, but had an electronic box inside the car where we could actually change the valving by time second from the launch of the clutch or the trans brake. It had a timer, and you could change the valving, so you could have a real soft compression off the starting line, and then start adding compression to it as you're going down the track. And then if you found a track that had a bump, you could go through your data recorder and say, oh, at 0.5, look, there's a bump in the track. Well, we could loosen the shock back up so we wouldn't unsettle the car. So, shock technologies came out a lot. John says, I remember the big thing was airbag, right? Well, that was before we had anti-roll bars. We didn't think about that. The first thing we did was took the anti-roll bars off the car because we wanted the front end to be, loose and allow the car to transfer weight. And we didn't even think about, the rear. And of course, the old 5.0s, the rear anti-roll bar was so small it didn't do anything anyway. So you're right. You could do a football in the spring, or you'd go to airlift and put a airbag in there and control it. They'd have the lift bags. They give you 2, but we'd only put the one in the right rear, and that would be it. About 30 pounds of air in that bag, and the car would leave pretty level. And then we got into putting bigger anti-roll bars on the back, and putting bigger anti-roll bars on the back, and to where now the high horsepower cars have a 3-inch anti-roll bar in the back. So technology changes as time goes on. There for a while I was racing little stock cars, dwarf cars or legend. It's like a legend car, but they're more outlaw, or they call mod lights. And there we weren't allowed to have adjustable shocks, but then we would run the Pro shock or the QA1 shock, and we'd have, I think they'd have like 10 different adjustments on different valvings on the shock. Now, you would run, at the time I actually had a shock dyno. It was a kind of a cheapy one, but we did have one, and we would run the shocks on there to verify the valving, and then we would just we ended up having a different valve on all 4 corners of the car, because again, we were oval track racing, and so we were only concerned about going left and making it the slowest part of the track the fastest part of the track. So but yeah, as times change, I think, and John, if you've been looking at the Viking stuff, I think Viking actually has a electronic autocross shock now that you can put a shock map or something in it. I remember seeing something about it. I didn't really get into it because it was like $10,000. I'm like, well, that's not something I'm ever going to afford. Excuse me. But there was a time, I think JRI Shock Company in North Carolina. There was a time where they have a magnetic shock. I think GM used them on some of the cars, but they actually started putting them in pro stock cars. I think it was Lion and Anderson that were running them first, and then some other teams got a hold before NHRA made them illegal. But when you have a magnetic shock that can control your dampening infinitely, and you do a lot of testing and a lot of data logging, I can see where that would be a huge benefit. When I do get my Vet Hawk finished, I'm going to have a Holly Dominator in the car. I'm going to go ahead and put 4-corner shock sensors on the car, ride height sensors, because I want to learn more about shock settings. So with the shock sensors in the car, ride height sensors in the car, I can make compression and rebound adjustments, and then I can use a math channel to figure out the velocity and how it changes. Pick up the velocity, the car gets less roll, or pick up the velocity and the car gets more roll, and from there make some knowledgeable adjustments to get the car to handle better around the track. Again, anytime you have any kind of racing, the slowest part of the track is where you want to concern all your efforts. Drag racing, it's the 60 foot. That is the most critical part of drag racing. You can get your 60 foot to gain, your ET will gain, and it's no horsepower change at all. So you don't have to have the most horsepower. All you have to do is have the best 60 foot. I've always had a rule of thumb that one number in the 60 foot is 3 numbers on the other end of the start at the finish line. And that's not exact, but it does work. If you have a 120 60 foot versus a 120 125, your 125 could be let's just say a 9-second run, but your 120 60 foot could be an 860 run. So nothing changed. You just fixed the 60 foot. Same as in autocross and road course racing, is if you can fix that slow section of the track, i.e. the corner, and make your entrance and exits faster, your lap times are going to drop, and you did nothing for horsepower. So that's where all your efforts should be way before you put more horsepower in a car, is get your corner speeds correct, and that'll be the best bet. So that's what all this is about. And my wife's home. So that's the whole gist of what I put these last couple live shows to get, just to open everybody's eyes to see what can be done. You don't have to be an engineer, and a lot of this isn't very expensive. All right, Bill, I'll see you next Tuesday. When my wife gets home, that usually means I'm wrapping up. So, but anyway, that's the whole thing. You want to work on your chassis dynamics at the slowest sections of the track. If you can pick those areas up, everything else comes with it, with no horsepower change. So that's what our goals are. Like I said, a lot of this stuff is pretty cheap. The Performance Trends software that I was showing you guys, the drag race 4-link one is $99. The road circle track one, I think, is $179. It's not very much in the grand scheme of things, and it's yours for a lifetime. Of course, like I said, in the coilovers springs are fairly cheap. So, if you can play around with spring rates and see how that works. Shocks are going to be your expensive part, so try to save and buy the best shock you can at the beginning of the rather than after you've already spent money on a mediocre shock and now you want to go to a better shock. Now you've spent money twice, so try to plan ahead there. Obviously, anytime we can make things lighter in the car, that's always going to be a plus, especially your unsprung weight. A lighter wheel, a lighter tire, a lighter rotor, all those things will benefit in straight line performance, whether you're drag racing or, autocross, road course, whatever, circle track. Anytime you can make the car lighter, it's going to accelerate quicker. And again, that's with no power changes. It's just the different parts on the car making it work better. So I think that's going to be a wrap for tonight. Unless I don't think anybody's put anything on the board, so I don't know if anybody had any questions about any of that stuff. If you're watching this after the show is not on anymore, it's not live, you're watching a recording, put them in the comments. I check comments in the morning and at night. So, and actually I get notifications right away on, when I get somebody puts a message on there. So if I got spare time at lunch or something like that, I'll go ahead and answer anything I can. And that's about it. Thank you guys for coming out again. This was episode 42, so we're nearing a full year of shows. So hard to believe it's happened so quick. Hit the like buttons. That helps out in the algorithm for YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. And then ring the bell if you want to get instant notification anytime I drop any new information. But with that, I think we'll call it a night. Hope everybody has a great week. I'm going to be, like I said earlier in the show, I'm leaving Thursday for a family deal till Monday. But I will be making a quick Sunday haul over to Bradenton to run Leo's car, and fingers crossed we're going to see some good information. Hopefully I'll have some video and some great news next Tuesday on the update for 4200. And I guess that's it. So I'll talk to everybody later. Have a great week, and we'll see you later. See ya.